Hello, everybody. My name is Roberto Vitón. I'm the founder and director of Valoral Advisors, an investment advisory firm that is specialized in food and agriculture investments. I would like to say thank you to the US Soybean Export Council for putting this program together and for inviting me to join you in this session. I know that we are in special times, so I hope that all of you are staying safe and healthy. And again, I'm very glad to be here today. During this program, we have heard about outlooks for the crops and also supply and demand projections. We have also heard about trends that are shaping our sector. So now, for the next 20 minutes, what I would like to do with you is to share an investment perspective of the food and ag investment sector. I would like to provide you with a brief introduction to the food and ag investment space. Then I would like to talk a little more about the trends and opportunities we see in the sector, and specifically those that might be most relevant to the food sector in Asia. And hopefully you will find that this is relevant to your business. Now, when we think about investing in food and agriculture, we can start by looking at the broad food and ag value chain. As you know, in our business, we can look at the upstream sector and all the input companies that are providing services, equipment, and inputs to the farmers and growers. We also have the midstream section of the value chain where we have all the processing companies, traders, and also the food companies, all the manufacturers. And finally, we have the downstream where we have distribution and retailers and the consumers. So this is a pragmatic or a simple way to look at the space. And we can put some numbers in terms of how investments have been flowing into our sector globally. So in the next slide, what you have in front of you, it's a chart that shows the evolution in the number of investment funds specialized in the food and ag sector globally. So you can see that back in 2005, there were only 40 funds globally investing in the space. And when we look at 2020, it's over 600. This gives you an idea of how the sector has been growing. And you can see that some of the main strategies have been focused on farmland, which is all the primary production, including row crops like soybeans, but also permanent crops and livestock and so on. A second area of investment has been what we call private equity, which is essentially investments in operating business all along the value chain. And finally, technology, which is mainly venture capital investments in what we usually call ag tech and food tech innovation. So really, since the early 2000s, investors have been recognizing the attractiveness of this sector. And we can say that effectively today, the food and ag sector is also an asset class for investors. We can also look at some of the distribution of these investments in different dimensions. So you will see that, interestingly, more than half of the assets under management for these funds are actually focused on North America, which is mainly the US. And this is really not surprising because the US remains really a major powerhouse in terms of food production and food exports. You can see also that some of these investments have been spreading into other regions. And in a similar fashion, you can see that out of the total assets under management from these funds, which, by the way, are close to $100 billion, quite a similar size, 36% is going to farmland and the other 36% to private equity. So these two categories really make the most. And again, should not be surprising because that's where all the production and processing takes place. Now, it's also interesting to look at where all this capital has been coming from. Who are the capital suppliers? So at Valoral Advisors, we look at many different investor segments. It's really amazing how over the recent years, we have seen a growing number of investors joining the space. As you can see here, we have first private investors, including high net worth individuals, family offices that have been investing in the space as a way to diversify. We also have institutional investors. This is really the largest pool of capital nowadays in our sector. And you can see their pension funds, insurance companies, endowments, foundations, even sovereign wealth funds. We also have among the investor segments banks who are increasingly investing with their own capital in the space, and of course, corporate investors, especially agricultural trading houses, but others as well. We also see public agencies becoming more active and also mission-driven investors. We see church endowments, nonprofit entities, and a growing number of impact firms which see the opportunity to invest in the sector and to deliver some positive outcomes associated to the activities they perform. And you can see actually there are some of the big names of investors that have been active. Now, in terms of the opportunities going forward, one way that we can look at the places or the areas to invest is by thinking of a thematic investing approach. If you're not used to look at a thematic investment approach, this is really about identifying the long-term trends that might shape a sector, and then thinking about what are the investment themes that arise from those trends, and finally identifying specific investment opportunities that provide exposure to those themes and those trends. So in this slide, and excuse me, it's very small, the goal is that you can actually then get this document and read it. But for this presentation, what I would like to focus on is really on the major trends and how this relates also to the food sector in Asia. So we have four main areas of relevant trends. One of them is what we call climate change and scarce natural resources. This is really about the supply side, and it's about how climate change is impacting our sector. We can also think about loss of arable land, land degradation, constraints on water availability. Also, we have a second area of trends that we call demographics and social change, and this has to do mostly with the demand side. So we see more informed and empowered consumers. We see population growth and rapid urbanization in emerging markets, clearly in Asia. We also see more health awareness and environmental awareness. So many of these trends will also affect our food and ag sector in different ways. Also, I would mention there, you can read digital lifestyle, busy lifestyles, the rise of the single person household, many of these trends that are particularly relevant in Asia. A third area is what we call changing economic power and the rise of emerging markets. And you can think about this in terms of the geopolitics and how they affect the food and ag sector. This is again particularly relevant in Asia, where we see growing demand for food, for animal protein. We see particularly China, India as growing markets. And we will touch on a few of these points later on as well. And finally, we have the technological breakthrough. And this is really, a major trend that is not only related to the food and ag sector, it's global. It goes through all the different industries. And actually, the technology innovation is a transversal trend that also affects the other ones. And we are seeing essentially how new technologies are becoming available to make agriculture smarter. We see also the shift from synthetics to natural inputs in agriculture and food production. And so here again, we will see how this connects to some of the opportunities that we will mention later on. Now, this kind of framework is really helpful in the long term. What I would like to also share with you is our views in terms of the takeaways from the COVID-19 pandemic and how they connect also to the investment opportunities going forward. So I think that by now you have read and heard a lot about the impact of COVID-19 on the food and ag sector. So my goal today with this slide is really to actually share with you some of the main takeaways. And for me, there are four main ones. The first one is really about how we see more local production closer to consumers. As we have seen with many of the disruptions created by the COVID-19, those who are able to have production and manufacturing closer to the consumers might benefit in the future. This is something that we have been seeing before. If you think about vertical farms, greenhouses, and other sort of production systems that are flexible enough to be closer to the consumers. We think this is something which will have a lasting impact going forward. Second, we also think about the acceleration of automation and digitalization. This is something that you might have heard. We have all been experiencing with more digital tools. In fact, we're using them right now. And in the food and ag sector, this is also very valid. We think that a lot of the food tech and ag tech innovation wave was already happening. We think that COVID-19 is going to accelerate this, is going to emphasize the need and convenience to increase adoption of these technologies. Third, we also see and we also expect increased scrutiny on food safety. Well, this is an important point related to COVID-19 if you think about the relation between animals and human health. But it also goes to the broader food and ag sector. We believe that consumers, authorities, and in general stakeholders in the food and ag sector will expect that farmers and food companies will provide more transparency, more visibility of how the food moves along the food supply chains. And I think here, again, technology can play a growing role. And finally, we think that once COVID-19 is over, we will see renewed efforts on sustainability. We think that climate change is really the big elephant in the room. And we notice that a lot of the investments going forward in the food and ag sector, actually all of them, anybody who is planning to invest in the sector will have to get a clear answer in terms of how their investments, how their businesses contribute to make the food and ag sector more efficient, but also more sustainable. Now, it's interesting to notice that many of these trends, we would say, were already present in our sector. So COVID-19, what has done is really to accelerate them, to emphasize the importance of these trends, okay? Let's now jump into some of the opportunities that we think might be most relevant to the food sector in Asia. The first one that I want to share with you is what we call climate smart farming. This is a concept that really focuses on how farmers can become more productive, more sustainable, and at the same time, how they can reduce their carbon emissions, their carbon footprint, how they can contribute to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, this is a major challenge, and farmers around the world are definitely doing the effort to bring new technologies to help in this goal. This is actually a small diagram that we have been using with some farmers recently, and just to show you, for example, how precision farming, how crop diversification and rotation, efficient use of water, reduced tillage, the use of renewable energies, different techniques for soil carbon sequestration, and many other technologies and practices are available today for farmers to become more climate smart. And I think this is interesting also for Asia. You can think about this not only for a soybean crop, but also you can think about rice in any place in Asia. And it is important because food retailers, consumers will increasingly demand these kind of practices from farmers. Now, another opportunity I want to share with you is really about vegetable proteins. We have all heard how we see a shift from animal protein to vegetable protein or plant-based proteins. But the opportunity is not just to invest in the food companies that produce these new products, but also in terms of how supply of the vegetable proteins, of demand for new legumes and pulses, how that can be actually tackled in the future. And it's not just the production, but we can also think about the inputs and the physical supply chains that will be required to provide growing volumes of new vegetable proteins to the market. We think that this is also a long-term opportunity, and probably we are in the early stages of this shift in consumer preferences. And again, this also connects, in my view, pretty much with the kind of shift in diets that we see across Asia. So another opportunity I want to mention briefly is what we call food certification and food safety assurance. As we said before, and the COVID-19 pandemic is a major wake-up call. Consumers, food retailers, authorities, in fact, all of us can think that food safety, food security has become even more critical. Everybody that is in the food and ag supply chain should think how we can make it more transparent, more visible. Luckily, here we have new technologies that can help in improving traceability, in improving transparency. You can think about blockchain solutions and a lot of different sensors available to help in tracking movement and conditions of food along the supply chain. All right, and I think the last one we will talk today is one that I like very much, and it's really about how we can upcycle food waste through circular economy solutions. We all know that food waste is a major challenge all along the food and ag value chain. It's happening in the farms, also at the food plants. It's happening with the distribution and retail. And of course, we as consumers are also responsible for food waste. In fact, the FAO estimates that a third of food produced every year is lost or wasted. And this is a major challenge because food waste means also challenges in nutrition, in food security, and also in terms of increased carbon emissions. We see a growing number of business model innovations and technologies that are tackling the issue of food waste, mainly by applying different concepts around circular economy, by recycling many of these waste or byproducts that are created along the supply chain and upcycling them to new products, feed, and other type of solutions. And of course, this is something which we believe is particularly relevant in Asia as it is in other regions. So with this last investment opportunity, I would like to finish the presentation. I hope that you have found it interesting to understand the broad food and ag investment space, how it looks like, who are the main investors in the sector, and especially what are the main investment opportunities going forward and how they can connect to your business. So I really thank you for your time, and I will then join the panel where we will be able to discuss further insights. Thank you so much.